I am Mark Jabbour, and this is the Cosmos Café, the brainchild of my Colorado pal, Marco V. Morelli, who I'm thankful has joined us and who studied and worked with Ken Wilber, who is the sort of impetus of this cafe. And I was ignited, sparked to reconsider Ken Wilber because he's resurfaced, probably due to the emergence of the intellectual dark web and podcasts and YouTube. So he's slid off his deathbed and come back and is reinserting himself in the dialogue of what the hell is going on. And so this discussion, I hope, I'm going to just briefly try and integrate several different theories, because I reread his novel Boomeritis, which he published 2002, and Marco, you joined his philosophy movement in what year?
2003, I moved to Colorado.
And did you move here because of Wilber, or?
Well, causality is hard to establish, but it was definitely correlated.
And so you worked and studied with him from 2003 to
about 2007.
Did
a short time, enough time for a deep dive, enough to have some perspectives.
Well, and I feel, or I think, that this forum is a derivative of your experience with Wilber and his philosophy.
I wouldn't call it a derivative. I would call it, I don't know what I would call it, actually. I think it's genetically related. I think that there's a, yeah, I think that there's DNA.
Really? You guys are related?
Or cosmically related. I kind of feel like maybe I orbited around the Wilber sphere for a few years, and I was attracted there from another place. And there was something compelling about what Wilber was writing. I was reading his books. I was practicing the kind of meditation that he was recommending in his books, Zen Buddhism and different kinds of yoga. I had a couple of friends who, one in particular, whose name is also Mark Benet, who was also a student and a practitioner, but we were also both artists, and we were just, I think, attracted to the visionary quality of what Wilber was proposing and what he was attempting to do concretely by founding an institute, which was Integral Institute. And so when I learned about that organization, and given that I had no other brighter prospects in my life, because of my personal circumstances and the age that I was about 26 or 27, it was the right time for me to do something like that. And I moved across the country and didn't really know anybody directly, but one thing led to another. I was invited to an event, and by a series of serendipitous connections, ended up meeting Ken and being invited to work with Integral Institute in its startup phase. And so I did that, and it was very intense, and it was a story that I don't want to recount here. I don't think that it's really relevant to the topic, because really what we're, I think, discussing is current events and what is the relevance of Wilbur's integral thinking to what's going on now, to what the fuck is going on now. I think that's really interesting. I was glad to see the video and to hear that he was really having some clear and coherent thoughts about what's going on, and I look forward to discussing those just on their own terms. But I do have a history with Wilbur, and so I have to kind of differentiate the parts that are personal and the parts that are perhaps transpersonal, and see what we can integrate, at least what I can integrate through this discussion. It's part of why I wanted to show up, is because it's a topic that's interesting to me on multiple levels.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I got reintroduced to his theories and philosophies because he resurfaced via what is now being called the internet, intellectual dark web, via forums like this, podcasts, via YouTube, and seems like he came back from the dead and now wants to reinsert himself into the conversation, and he mentions his novel Boomeritis, excuse me, which I read shortly after he wrote it, and apparently shortly after you came out to Colorado and got involved with him. And it was published in 2002. And what I find amazing rereading it is he foreshadowed the situation we are in now, culturally, globally, with his theory. And when I watch him now speaking via YouTube, all these podcasts, whatnot, it hasn't changed. He believes that he's got the answer. He knows what's going on, and I have my own, ideas and theories, and I got my whiteboard here. And if you all will indulge me, I'll try and incorporate his theories with other theories, and we can take our conversation from there. Is that all right with everyone?
Yeah, so part of the framing for this, right, that I saw in the forum was that you've written a book, which is your own theories, told very differently than Wilbur tells his, about contemporary politics and culture and all that. So I would appreciate, and I just wanted, like, my background. I've only started your book because I needed to finish another couple of books before I got to yours, but I did start it, and we've also had multiple conversations, so I can infer some of your views, and I think that it would be. I'm interested in the comparison and contrast of your assumptions, because I believe Wilbur makes certain assumptions that are, articulated or expressed in his views, and so do you, and they're different. And what the difference is, I think, would be an interesting, for me at least, would be an interesting thing to examine and to learn from, I hope, because I'm buddies with you. I've had that relationship with him. Somehow you all are part of how I make sense of the world. And this cafe and infinite conversations, it's partly, I see it as like an extended brain or extended mind. It's like a way of making sense of things that we are conducting in manners that are consciously and or unconsciously different than what I experienced when I was with Integral Institute. That was definitely a big influence for me. So there are multiple levels and sort of lines of connection, and I appreciate that you've stepped forward and up to you've shown up. I don't know if you've grown up. I don't know if you've woken up. I don't know if you're going to clean up, but you've shown up, and I think that's a great step. And so have all of us. So I look forward to the conversation.
All right. Well, I can see, maybe if you go to the speaker thing, you can see my whiteboard better. Basically, what I've done after reading Boomeritis is I've taken Wilber's theory, my theory, Maslow's theory, Gene Gebser's theory. This is fun. The CIA's theory, and Lorna Smith Benjamin, who is a personality disorder specialist, psychologist. And I put them all within the framework of Wilber's theory, which I think he has so many things right. He has so many things right. So his basic, and some of you are familiar, aren't familiar, he has he calls it 4 quadrants of the human condition. And he separates them via interior, exterior, individual, personal, and collective. And I've sort of reorganized a little of what he's talking about, in that I've placed his green meme, which he calls postmodernism, in the individual interior quadrant. I've put his individual exterior interaction with the world in orange. So up above the center point, you have what I call, and Lorna Smith Benjamin calls, differentiated. In other words, you're separated from the collective. Below the half point, in the lower left quadrant, he calls, I've titled that one the red meme, and he also calls it, well, I'll get to this later. This is the red meme, and I think this is where he has got things sort of wrong. And then over here is what I call the blue, or he calls the blue meme, exterior collective interaction with the world. And again, below the line, I use Lorna Smith Benjamin's, this is your enmeshed within the relationship with other people. Above it, you're differentiated. So, and also, so he's got interior, exterior, individual, collective. And then I attach Lorna Smith Benjamin's theory. She says she divides the world differentiated, enmeshed, friendly, and hostile. Gebser calls these different sort of what it means, aspects, whatever, evolutionary development. He calls them archaic, magical, mystical, and rational, right? Ed, that's his kind of theory.
Mythical.
Mythical.
Yeah. You said
I
mystical.
combine.
That's fine. You had said mystical, and I was thrown off by that. You just misspoke, I think.
Who misspoke? Me?
You did. Yeah. You said mystical.
Mystical.
You mean
mythical.
Right.
Mystical.
There's a difference. There's a difference. There's a huge difference.
Well, there are subtle differences in all these different world views. And what I'm trying to do is what Wilbur suggests, put them all together into what the hell is going on.
That's okay. That's fine. It was just the word mystical kind of tripped me up there a bit. Okay.
And Wilbur goes into a detail on what characteristics fit into his four quadrants, and he and I differ a little on the development of consciousness, in that I think but it is all, he's right in that all of these things are happening within an individual at the same time, although there may be different, some may take precedent at particular times, but his lower left is, I call his red meme, and it corresponds, I think, to evolutionary biology, Freud's unconscious, Maslow's basic needs, the CIA's fear, and Gebser's archaic. And that's happening within all of us all of the time, although most of it's unconscious. Then we go to what Wilbur calls the blue meme, and I categorize this as these are, it's again the collective exterior interaction with the world. It's society's rules, its affiliation, its norms, and it provides with Maslow his secondary level of development, safety, and with the CIA, that's their money quadrant, and with Gebser, it is the mystical or mythical, and this is where we build stories. This is religion, traditional religion, and then in the individual interior category, which I don't know, maybe that's my favorite, and I put Wilbur's green meme. This is the essential I, where you start to realize, think about things. Who am I? And so I call it the essential I. And with Maslow, this is where this is his fourth level, the esteem needs. And with Gebser, I call this actually the magical, in that this is sort of, well, your interior thoughts, beliefs, dreams. It's not, but it's influenced by all these others, but it's you inside your head. And I call it magical. I put Gebser's magical here because, yeah, in our dream world, we can go all kinds of places and do all kinds of things. And over here in the exterior, individual and exterior, I think this is Wilbur's orange. I call it, this is the mask, the persona, and it corresponds to Maslow's third level, belongingness, love, relationship. And with Gebser, this is his rational quadrant. With the CIA, it's their ideology. Let me speak briefly about why I put the CIA in this four quadrants. Is because the CIA goes all over the world and they try to flip people, make them an asset for to bring them over to the worldview of America, which is sort of the green meme. But what's great about Wilbur is these are all going on. They are within an individual, all going on at the same time. You're operating with all these systems. This is integral. All these different ways, interior, exterior. I love this. Individual, collective. All these different theories can fit inside of that framework. But Wilbur has a little different view of these, as I do. And the CIA has four quadrants. How do you flip somebody? You go to Afghanistan or wherever, some country or tribal region in Africa, wherever, all over the world, and you try and get assets, intellectual, you try and get people to your side. They use these four motivations: fear or force, money, ideology, or vengeance. They try and figure out the CIA operatives, and this is going on with Russia, China. They all have the same shit. They're trying to infiltrate, flip people, and get them on their side. And so they look at a person, an individual, and what motivates them? Is it fear? Is it force? CIA calls it coercion. You could throw torture in here. Is it money? Can I basically bribe them? Is it vengeance? Do they want revenge on somebody? Or is it ideology, which is basically lying? You try and make friends with them and tell them, yeah, I'm on your side, man. You got the right thing going on. So I think my critique of Wilbur, and if you go to YouTube, he's on there a lot. There are critiques of him. He's on Rebel Wisdom. He did, we posted one interview, I think that was with Rebel Wilson. And then the guy has somebody on who's a critique of why Wilbur's philosophy didn't become realized. And of course, Wilbur has his own version of this. But I think he misunderstands this, the collective interior red world, the physical world, basic needs, evolutionary biology, the unconscious, he believes in, and we've talked about this a little bit. Gebser, Ed, you can speak to this. They think all this stuff is going on, but then all of a sudden, there's a leap to another level of the beingness, said as like consciousness. And Wilbur says the reason we've got it all screwed up is we're in flatland. We haven't understood the evolution of consciousness. My position is we are in flatland, and there is no evolution of consciousness. That's invented, and it's actually a part of the magical thinking. It's not grounded in the real world biology, but it's just another way for people, humans, to think they can transcend, and Wilbur talks about this, transcend ego and personality. But what Wilbur fell victim to was his ego and personality. You can't, that's not the way evolution works. He misunderstood evolutionary biology. He was educated, his formal education as a biochemist, and he built his theory around atoms to molecules to cells to organisms, and he thinks we just go on forever. Okay, I'll stop. Take it away, Ed.
I have no idea why I should take anything anywhere at this point, but I think you're misreading Gebser, but I don't think that's the key to all of this.
The what?
It's not the key to what we're talking about, whether you correctly or incorrectly or are misreading Gebser or Wilbur or anybody else. We all approach this. Gebser does this, Wilbur does this, you do this. We make some basic assumptions. And based on those assumptions, we can get to certain conclusions. If we have other assumptions, we get to different conclusions. So if we, and this is a thing that you emphasize and reemphasize, is something I actually very much appreciate about what you do and how you present it, is you're locked into the biology. And consciousness has no room in biology, but it's there. So where does it come from? Where does this what is consciousness in some general terms that we can, use the word and kind of agree on what we're speaking about? And how does it come about? You know, why are we conscious at all? Because if we are a product of just let me the sentence to the end. If we are a product of a biological evolution, consciousness showed up somewhere along the way. Therefore, I would deduce it must have some kind of survival value. But where did it come from? And why do we have it? And I think right there, we need to kind of come to terms to where are we coming from in terms of consciousness, because I think Gebser takes a different stance, and I don't understand or know enough about Wilbur to make a judgment, but it seems to me from what I've heard that he also makes a different assumption so that he gets to a different place. That's why they get to transcendence, because they started from a different assumption. But I still need to get clear on, so what is consciousness and why do we have it? It must be a biological evolutionary product. You don't claim that it's some kind of epiphenomenon that can be disregarded.
No.
Right.
You're right in attaching me to the biological, and there's sort of, yeah, I think that we humans are a product of evolution, biology, and that we are constrained. We are physical, animal beings, and consciousness came out of, and way back in the beginning of the Café, basically it's sort of an accident. There isn't a grand design purpose. And Wilbur and I believe Gebser, is Wilbur built on Gebser and Aurobindo. He used those and he has this spiral dynamics that we humans are eventually, if we can get past this sort of impasse of the mean green mean, that we are destined to leave our bodies and become just pure spirit. We are God. And I draw a line there. I go, no, we're not going. No, we're just, that's part of the narcissism that he talks about and he fell victim to. His, he was all about transcending ego and personality, but he demonstrated very much that, yeah, it's not, nobody that's just, we're part of the process of life. We're a process of evolution, but there is no, we're going nowhere that our ego and personalities take us. We're not going to leave our bodies. And that's sort of that mind-body thing that's been plaguing people since and my position is we have not evolved for 40 or 50,000 years. Whenever the brain reached its current capacity and we started to create art, we're still there. There's nothing beyond that. That's my position.
Yeah, I understand that. And you partially answered the question I had. But you made one statement that consciousness was a kind of accident. Well, I can understand in a mutational theory, mutations occur randomly. I'm going to call that accidental, for lack of a better term. And out of that, consciousness emerges, if I followed correctly what you said. but that accident, quote unquote, must have had some kind of value, or it would have been rejected evolutionarily. And you didn't quite answer where Wilbur or Gapes or anybody thinks this is all going is irrelevant at this point. What is the value? What is the value in human beings even having consciousness? Because something has to be valuable evolutionarily in order to sustain. Whether or not it's changed in the meantime, that's also a separate discussion.
Well,
So,
I think the proof is in the pudding, and we've talked about this, and I know John disagrees with me, and maybe some of you do, but we humans, the value was, as with any species, we dominate the biosphere, the planet. And it is because of our minds, because of consciousness, that we have this ability to solve problems as they arise, whatever they may be, because of the consciousness. But there was a co-evolution between, and it was random, and it was a mutation. You can call it an accident, a mistake. It may wind up being a mistake, because I don't think we're going to solve the problem of what we've got now. I believe is overpopulation of a species, and the natural world has a way of dealing with that. But we have this mind. Can we figure it out? But we're not forward thinking like that. We're like, you give me a problem, you, me, humans, and some of us will figure it out. In other words, damn, I can't get across the river. I need to get across the river. Well, how do you do that? We don't know what's on the other side of the river, but we want to get to the other side of the river for whatever reason. And this is where personality comes in. People are different. You have some, but one isn't better than the other. My theory is we evolved as a social species, in that it takes all different kinds of perspectives on a problem situation to resolve it. And so we have these different personalities, and somebody in the group goes, hey, what if we do this? In other words, we're not all the same. We're very, very different. And that has served the function of allowing us to dominate the planet. And now we've dominated it to such a degree that something's got to give, and we don't seem to be able to figure that out. And that's back here in the red collective interior. We're still tribal, and that's reflected in what's going on today. So, and I don't have a solution. I don't know where it's going. This fear and force still rules when push comes to shove.
So just one more point of clarification. So the evolutionary advantage of consciousness is the ability to dominate.
To solve problems.
Well, you earlier said dominate. I don't want to split hairs on this, but if the domination, there's a difference between solving problems and dominating, same. And if because it becomes, in a sense, I'm not trying to read anything into what you're saying, but in a sense, it becomes the purpose. So, because the evolution, an evolutionary advantage must be in some way purposeful, shouldn't it be?
The purpose,
Or why?
the purpose is simply replication, which you could call dominance. A species, no matter what, a living thing reproduces. That's it. There's no let's see.
Okay, so we're simply better reproducers than other species.
Yeah, they find
better. I put the word "better" in quotation marks, please.
They
more effective reproducers.
Like, to go back to a recurring theme in these cafes with the bird and the crow and the nut and the traffic and all that, all sorts of things have been attributed to that. Where I live, the niche I live in, biological niche, there are no crows. The dominant bird species is the magpie. But if I go 3 miles west, the crow dominates. And so the species adapts to a physical environment. And yeah, the magpies here will reproduce, and they're dominant. And they don't know what they're doing. They have no fucking idea. And for the most part, most of us humans don't have any fucking idea.
Okay, that's also another discussion. For a different reason. I just wanted to get clear on a couple of things. You've helped me out a great deal. Thank you for that. But this is the part I appreciate about your stance and where you're coming from. You see, I don't want to underestimate that. I don't want you to think that I'm only being contrary for contrary's sake. This is very helpful in getting me to sort out where my own assumptions are and things. So keep that up. But I've hogged enough of the mic for now. Let's let others.
I appreciate your presentation here. I do have a suggestion for later to actually post what you have there so we can see it a little bit better, or whoever's listening will have the access to what you've developed over the past week or two or three. But you presented it well enough where it's floating there in the back of my mind right now. On consciousness, I'm going to refrain from any personal opinions, but we did discuss maybe in our second cafe with the Bohm, Krishnamurti, the ending of time discussion of kind of the accident of a certain form of consciousness or a certain form of psychological understanding. So our psychology is tied in with biology, which causes various thoughts to go running amok or on tangents that may or may not be correct, or create theories that are either well developed or harebrained or whatever it might be. But we don't know enough about consciousness to go down that route of determining exactly what it means for everyone in the world. I do know that, and I will go personal here, I did like to listen to Sam Harris, to Jordan Peterson, to Ken Wilber, to kind of the non-mainstream rock stars so they've labeled themselves to a certain extent the intellectual dark web. And it's been maybe a year since that has been going on, and I personally stopped following, but I appreciate what you've put together here. I know it's going on in the background. I know the these non-mainstream, now coming into some sort of mainstream discussion through technology, through, well, YouTube is out there for anyone. And if you have a voice, like you're saying, if you're able to dominate the airwaves to some extent with your viewpoints, these individuals aren't doing it by any means possible. They're getting good ideas out there. Whether they're the right ideas, it's not up for me to decide, nor for me to listen to a certain extent anymore. I've realized there's better things to do with my time, or I've gone as far as I perhaps can. So with what you're putting together here, I appreciate it, because we in conversation here right now are having a conversation that would not be had by any of these individuals. As for the content of the Ken Wilber and I guess it was the Rebel Wisdom talk you posted, that was informative. There were definitely some nuggets in there that maybe updated a bit on Ken Wilber's perspective, made it more relevant to where he has been and how it relates to Jordan Peterson or others. So that's all I want to say right now.
Can I add just one thing to that? I wanted to enhance something that Doug said. I don't think we can, nor should we, this is where I agree with you 100%, define what consciousness is. But I also think it's equally important that every one of us uses the word that we kind of understand. What does that individual mean when they're using it? Because we all use it in different ways. And to be aware of those different subtleties, so that when I say it, it's different than when Mark says it or when Marco says it or whatnot. That's the only place I was going. I also wanted to underline in broad strokes, if you could take a JPEG of your whiteboard and like post it in addition or put it on, a slide or something, it would be very helpful, because then we get the full detail. Although your explanation was exceedingly helpful, it would just be nice to have a visual as well for us.
Sure. I need a crew, a staff. I need about 4 or 5 people to help me with all this stuff, and I'm not in a position to procure those people. So, but yeah, I certainly can do that. Well, I'll leave it. I'm interested somewhat. Some of us are on, or Doug and I at least, are on Goodreads, and I see where Doug has been reading a lot of Herman Hesse, and he's one of those people. I think there are individuals, no matter how far we go back, that think about this sort of stuff, and they try and figure out what the hell is going on. But this 21st century with the internet and the global connected community, it's just, I don't know, maybe the technology has gotten ahead of our ability to deal with it. One of the seed questions I asked is, how is time, I can spend all day, every day, listening to podcasts to smart people talk about stuff, or stupid people. And there's probably more of the latter than the former. We as a species are at this inflection point And personally, with the individual interior, I'm sort of an optimistic person. But when I look out at the world, damn, I'm not sure. You know, if I was I don't blame young people now for not having children, because it's and two of you have young children, so I would think it's more important to you where this goes than it is to me. My time's about up, pretty close. But that's a thing too. Like in the end, Wilbur's talking about the same thing the blue meme is talking. He's talking about like living forever. What was that?
I learned as a kid, when it itches, you scratch.
Oh, okay. Well,
That's all.
Well,
there's no hidden meaning in that. I was just scratching my head.
Well, and that's what most people do. But through meditation, you can learn not to scratch the itch. Correct, Michael?
Yes, you can. You can.
I was going to respond.
Right now, I'm not meditating.
Actually, you have a choice of whether you scratch the itch or not.
That's what the theory is.
No, that's, well, from your point of view, but from my practice, it's very real. Either I scratch it or I don't, and I open to the choice. Do I want to scratch it or do I want to just let it go by? Where before I would just unconsciously, just out of habit, scratch. Now I can actually, especially when it comes to sex, I can enjoy the itch.
It always comes back to sex.
Well, that's
Always.
because life and evolution is always trying to propagate and move forward and move on, even through consciousness.
I had a comment about what you said, Mark, about raising children, and before the itch was scratched, I wanted to state that I seek out teachers for my children, whether I'm around or not around, or I'm taking tidbits of information from here or there for my children, because they're in the world, they're already here. It's not a decision as to whether I'm going to have children or not. So I want them to be listening to the right people, and tying this in with all the what's available on the internet. Of course, I have a 5-year-old and 11-month-old, so this isn't too much relevant as to what we're saying here, but I want my conversations to reflect the conversations that they'd be willing to have or participate in, or the information, that the knowledge being spread, to be worthwhile, to be worth their time. So for that, oh geez, it's not a car. So what I'm getting at, I think, is I want my children to listen to what you just said, to understand what's being said here. I want it to make a difference. I want you, you've spent a lot of time on this, obviously. It doesn't take even just a simple whiteboard design right there. That takes at least 10, 15 minutes to make. So you put a lot of time and effort into this, and I appreciate that. And what you're saying, whether it's right or wrong, or we agree or disagree, doesn't matter. It's a matter of Can you have a conversation with my 5-year-old about this? And does that kind of make sense to how this ties in with everything else? Because I can't pinpoint it, but I might be derailing us even more than the itch and the scratch, but I want this conversation to matter, if that makes sense. So,
well, it does, and it gets to the heart. That's a strange metaphor, but up here in the green meme, we have Abraham Maslow's esteem needs, and that's sort of the drive to matter, to have purpose. Some people hear, this is the blue, this is the red. They're not concerned with that. And I think Wilbur falls into a category, I call them elitists, snoots, thought leaders. A lot of people, they're just worried about, the next meal, sort of. And that doesn't mean they're less, they may be better equipped to deal when the apocalypse comes. They may survive, and that we thinkers, we may be out the friggin' door because we're slow thinkers. We go, by that time, the spears through our heart or something. I'm at the point now. I realize that I'd like some grandchildren. Damn it! Sit on the.
To be talking to about that. We're not the people you need to be talking to about that.
Well, you had grandchildren.
I have grandchildren.
Yeah.
I have 2 now and 2 on the way. 3 now and 2 on the way.
Wow.
We have
you're
coming
my
in,
hero. You're
we
my
have
hero.
Twins coming in May or June. So
wow.
We're just going to up the ante. We're going to increase the production of unnecessary human beings on the planet, by another 60%. It's for our family. You kind of take it, you have to take it as it comes and as it is. And that's the way that goes. But, like Doug, I like to think that things mean things. And that's why that I'm always asking, well, what do you mean by that? And how am I to understand that? And what are you trying to get at? Or what do I need to take from this? And I think it's kind of derailed my own thought. The whole idea about why we do the things we do and how do we end up where we end up takes on a lot of relevance, especially when you see that people are going to have to deal with that. And just to bring it down to, like the current affairs, the rampant self-contradictoriness of our current state of, let's say, political affairs. But it goes into further education sphere and then family life. It's more than just politics. Is a real problem, I think, or it's an issue that needs to be dealt with. And like Doug says, he would like to have good teachers for his children or people that they can go to. But the most important thing that he can do or I believe I can do up until then, is to help those kids discriminate between what's of value and what's not. It's like you said, you could watch YouTube videos all day. Do you know if you're listening to a stupid person? Well, you can spend hours listening thinking it's one way, and at the end come to the realization it wasn't. But, you know, and I would like to develop a few techniques for my grandkids that they don't have to take hours to do that. You have to recognize that quickly these days. I think it's essential to recognize in a very short period of time, am I talking with someone that's worth talking to because he's going to help with my own existence or not, or is he going to hinder? And there's a lot that gets said that's very that hinders. It just gets in the way. You just have to, you know, wade through so much. I suppose people have been doing that all along. Why don't I want to cross the river? I'm not sure, but I'll figure out a way to do it and get to the other side and go, no, well, I don't need to be here anyway. Okay, there's no food over here, or there's no building materials or whatever it is that I thought I was looking for. But since a lot of this does play out in the head realm, one would think we have ways to identify that more quickly than not, that I don't need to be dealing with this right now. And it's becoming increasingly difficult in our current, the way things are playing out socially. It's becoming increasingly difficult to find people that one can talk to in any kind of a meaningful way in order to sort and sift those things that need to be sorted and sifted. So,
and that process of doing that is life-threatening, of sorting and sifting. I think on a certain level, all of us feel threatened by that process. And I think one of the things that I enjoy about this cafe and what's the dialogue that's happening right now is there's a certain feeling tone that I'm comfortable with, that of actually engaging in that sorting out process and still having room of working with really the felt sense of how different we are. But Mark, I also feel that part of the problem is we have to understand both how we are the same and how we are different, because it's not either or. It's just a matter of how it plays out proportionally from each person's point of view. Like, I feel different than you in a lot of ways, but I feel connected to you with your passion of speaking from your point of view and actually understanding, even though I don't necessarily agree with your assumptions, I agree with your passion to speak up and try to share your point of view, you know? So I think a lot of it would help if we were able to, well, I know what I'm doing. Coming to these cafes and having conversations with people out on the street, and Ed is right. I have a sensitivity of who I can open up to and have these kind of conversations. But the more I do it, I feel what it's giving to me is, this is the small way I'm going to participate with this what the fuck moment on this planet. Because bottom line, what has freed me is all I can do is participate. I can't know the outcome, and maybe that's okay. In fact, not being attached to the outcome actually has freed me up to go ahead and participate more fully.
I think just briefly, and I'd sure like to hear from Marco, I think with Wilbur's interior, exterior, individual, collective, in the novel Boomeritis, he uses a technique. In some ways, it's a really stupid novel. I mean, his egocentrism just shines through. But he has so many good points. But I think he he reiterates, and he did on, just, a week ago, a month ago, when he does these interviews, he says, I think he gets it wrong that everyone starts at square one. But we don't. We are born into a family, into a society. So we don't start to actually become an individual, an interior individual, think for ourselves, be self-conscious for a number of years, which is, I think, what Doug and Marco with young children, you see that. But they are born into the society that you guys sort of create for them with your decisions.
But I think you're misreading when he says that we're all born at the same level. That's what he's talking about. We all, in terms of forming our ego and an individual, we begin at that place. We begin within a family. We begin within such. We all start from that, and then as we go through life, we're going to develop our ego, our maturity, our understanding. So we do all come into this life at ground zero. All of us.
Well, I think, again, he doesn't understand evolutionary biology, because we're not a blank slate.
I don't think he thinks we are. I don't think I disagree with that point and that interpretation, because I don't think he thinks the way I've read him, and I've read Boomeritis too, and the way I've read him, and I don't agree with everything, but on a developmental level, the way he articulates, I don't think he thinks that we're a blank slate. He basically thinks that that needs to be thrown out. That's old 19th century thinking. I think. I mean, that's the way I've read him. That's what I'm saying. I'd be interested in Marco giving his 2 cents, because just to see where we're at, to give us some balance, sort of.
And before he takes his deep breath to hold forth, which I hope he does, the one thing that Wilbur did say in the interview that was posted up here, that I found actually very thought-provoking and helpful for me reflecting on what was going on, is he made a very clear distinction between growing up and waking up, which I hadn't heard in that form before. And I thought that's a very helpful metaphor, if you will, for approaching this whole subject, meaning, we're all asleep at some time, and we all wake up, and we all grow up as well. And growing up physically, we do start at the same place. The influences that we have, the environment plays, and this is what I hear Mark saying, plays an extremely important and impacting role in all of that. So it's not all going to happen in very infinitely based on the number of people that are involved in it, because each one, even, my brothers and I grew up in the same quote unquote environment. It's not the same environment, because when you're the third child or the fourth child, it's different than being the first child or whatever. So those kinds of things. So it's always kind of unique, but it kind of follows general patterns that we can identify, and those can be helpful, just as like anchor points and helping us come to terms with that. But like everyone else here, I'm anxious to hear what Marco has to say.
Deep breath. Okay, so I kind of think one of the difficulties with the presentation, like you're trying to do, is it's kind of like the optometrist's office. When you go to the optometrist and they have that machine with the different kind of combinations of lenses on it, to test your eyesight. and they could switch them out, right? So each kind of set of lenses has its own configuration. But I think that these theories are kind of like that. They're lenses for disclosing and interpreting reality, and there are overlaps between them. Roughly speaking, you could say that one concept in one person's system corresponds to the same concept in somebody else's system. And I think that that's part of what Wilbur does, and it's part of what you do just organically. Like, that's how your cognitive process works, is that you compare theories, and then you try to find the interconnections and see how they line up. But I think that it's just inherently a difficult thing to do, because each theory is right. Each theory is, a reflection partly of the theorists, partly of the discourse and the context and everything surrounding how that theory was formed, and then how it was adopted by others and disseminated into the world and interpreted the movement around it. Freud had a movement, Wilbur has a movement, and Gebser, Aurobindo, they each have. So these bodies of work are developed, and they have these correspondences because they're all looking at reality, and they're doing it, in Wilbur's terminology, roughly from the same kind of altitude, or roughly from the same structure of consciousness. Like, you can see things that are similar between Aurobindo, Wilbur, Gebser, Jabbour, and so forth. Yeah. And so I think that it would be a very technical and theoretical conversation to kind of go into the details of what I think is right and what I think is wrong about how you interpret things. Because one thing about these systems is that they're relatively self-contained. So if you get into Wilbur and you begin to understand what he means by the quadrants and levels and states and structures and waves and lines, it makes sense within his system. But once you step outside of that system and start using the same words in other contexts, it begins to introduce a lot of confusion. And so that's the reason that we have academics, is to just figure all that stuff out. I personally don't have the time to do all that, and I don't think it's not of the essence here. To me, the question about sort of your assumptions and starting points is really essential. It's really crucial. And so part of what I sense in this whole dialogue and the presentation you've made and where you may be going with this is that there's something you're really attracted to in Wilbur's work, right? There's, you've praised him even though you have your differences and your critiques, and you've expressed the things that you think that he's gotten wrong. But there's something that he's, has, there's some that he's communicated, that he's put together, that you're interested in, because it's seeming to account for things that, and maybe also to reflect things that you're already feeling and thinking. So I think that brings, I'm really going to jump around a bit here. I have kind of a smattering of notes, but it brings us to the intellectual dark web, which I think is a misnomer, because the dark web, the idea of the dark web was that you weren't supposed to know about it or how to find it. These guys are all promoting themselves all the time. There's nothing dark about it. It's a business venture basically, and this is their guerrilla marketing term, and Wilbur will call it the integral dark web, and somebody else, suddenly it'll be the dark web meme, and everybody will have their own dark web, and then it won't mean anything anymore. But as I understand what that movement or that sort of grouping is about, is that it's a reaction to a reaction to a reaction, in a way, right? Like, those thinkers are wanting to assert the values that Wilbur would call orange or rational. They're wanting to assert that reality is comprehensible, that we can make sense of things, we could form plans, we could, apply values in a more universal way and progress out of, the difficulties we find ourselves in through discourse and debate, and that there are certain norms and principles that you have to have in a society in order to allow that to happen. And one of those is free speech. Another is a respect for science and reason. And, they have various values that they are wanting to espouse and promote. And those are radical values now compared to what Wilbur calls the green mean, which is postmodern and is more identified with identity politics and grassroots movements and a sort of a trans national, a trans individual, like it's just a different set of worldviews and perspectives and people who hold them. And so, that kind of postmodern world of relativism and of not kind of having an objective benchmark or an objective reference for truth, where truth becomes sort of subjectivized and, maybe you'd call it magic, maybe you'd call it a mix of different things. That's what I think that the intellectual dark web people are responding to. And Wilbur is bringing something different actually to that conversation, which they don't really discuss. And that's the developmental point of view, the idea of consciousness developing. And Wilbur has very articulate, very elaborately articulated views on how that happens. And the mental rational way of doing consciousness, mental rational kind of form of consciousness that establishes universal rules and scientific methods and liberal governments and industrial societies, like that's only one stage in a much bigger process and sequence. So Wilbur's philosophy, one starting point for it is like the Big Bang, like, because let's say that that's a scientific truth in some sense. I mean, whether there was really a bang or not, that's probably another misnomer. Other people want to suggest but what was there? Like, what do we know scientifically was there? Energy and hydrogen atoms, and some kind of combination of forces, electromagnetic, nuclear, strong, weak, gravity, and that's what was there in this rapidly expansive sort of cloud for a few billion years. I don't know the astrophysical exact sequence, but the idea is that you went from nothing, you went from just an energy explosion to something that is much more aesthetic and complex. And the thinking is, how do you get from there to here? And is it plausible? Is it realistic even? Is it reasonable to say that purely happened through random mutations of inert matter that somehow, at some point, began developing self-awareness? Like the scientific story, that flatland story, and this is what Wilbur points out in his critique, is it doesn't make sense at that level. It only makes sense if you adopt an ideology that's self-contained, where you have assumptions about the world, and then everything builds around those assumptions. And that's what, like, the modern scientific Western rational worldview is, and that's also what the postmodern worldview is. And in Wilbur's theory, there's the archaic, what he might, or Gebser would call the archaic and magical and mythic, and they all have their logics and structures, and they're all relatively self-contained once you get in them, even though there's a lot of difference, and but you can find patterns. And So the thought then is, well, here we are, and we've become this species of humans who not only have sensation, the sensation that even a bug may have, or the perception that a animal may have, but we also have something called consciousness that can, this is how I would understand it, is that part of what it's doing is it allows us to virtualize. It's a virtual layer to physical reality so that we can predict the future, we can anticipate the future, and we can also remember the past. This dimensionality opens up where there's not just immediate perception, but there's a world, because there's a past, there's a future, there's a present, and there's a flow. And now in the scope of all of that, going from, hydrogen gas cloud 14.5 billion years ago to a planet with not only all the elements, all the atomic elements, but then all of the molecules, and then life forms on it, and then cognition, like in the sense of mental cognition, forms out of some of those life forms. Why it would be, the idea that it stops there, and that there aren't other potentialities for what consciousness is, or for what this whole thing is doing, or that it only means reproduction, the only purpose of it is reproduction. It sort of begs it begs a lot of questions. And, I think that Wilbur has he has a metaphysics, and it does have to do with sex. And it's not that original, actually. It goes back to Plato. It's the idea that there is a force, there is a spirit that evolves through different shapes, different expressions, and the same thing that, the same force that what's Dylan Thomas's line? I'm going to mangle this. Through the green shoot drives the flower, or something like that. Oh, I should know that. We're a poet. I should know that. But that is the same. That's the same attraction that arises between a man and a woman, or a man and a man, or whatever other combinations, or between minds, or even between a human and something they would conceive to be divine or infinite.
The planet? There's
the planet, the cosmos. That is the same force taking different shapes and becoming more complex and variegated and aesthetic and intelligent. And that's evolution. And we're now in this crisis because we have been, this species, the human species, has become very successful on the basis of that evolutionary emergent of consciousness. And we are, able to mobilize the resources that the whole biosphere has created in order to further extend ourselves. And that's where technology comes in, because we begin to extend all of our capacities, including our perceptual and our cognitive and our conscious capacities. And so we have to have an idea of where to go next and what we're going to do with this, because somebody has to take responsibility for the mess that has been created. And who's going to do that? Right.
Boomeritis.
Right. So to me, what we have to kind of get beyond is all the fighting that is not actually taking responsibility for the fact that we may collapse this biosphere, and something else will happen, and there's probably billions of other planets where life is emerging and consciousness is emerging. That's what I would wager, and it's probably all happened infinite times before. So it's like not actually new, but it is new because the universe is this sort of like novelty engine. And I think that, here's just what I know Michael wants to jump in, but here's what I think that you're attracted to in Wilbur, if I may be so bold as to make a suggestion. Yeah, I think that there's a beingness, what you called a beingness. There's a sense of the infinite, or a sense of the transcendent that is, that he's totally transparent about. Like he's, he doesn't pretend that it's not real. And I think that, although he, in his life, as far as I know, and in his institutions, hasn't perfectly integrated everything. Like it's not all, the ego is still there and the dysfunction is still there, and he's not separate from all the rest of the crap that we've all kind of generated. But that doesn't mean that further growth isn't possible. And part of what he's saying is that it has to happen holistically. It has to happen in consciousness. It also has to happen in behavior and in our physical being. It also has to happen in our environment and in our systems and our technologies. And it also has to happen in our culture and in our social, and emotional lives. And they all support each other. And if one thing is really highly developed and something else is poorly developed, that's going to cause problems, big problems, right, in a person or in a society. And that's why I think his framework is very useful, but it's also one framework. It's one set of lenses. And what I've wanted to advocate for is a framework inclusive, but not a framework centric kind of community. In other words, that we could flip different lenses, we could throw away the whole apparatus, we could enter into more magical or more mythical or more mystical kinds of experiences, which are not frameworks exactly. And we don't have to be we don't have to be kind of adherents to or have particular allegiance to one framework.
Imprisoned?
You can put it that way. I mean, it's relative though, because it's also liberate. If your framework is smaller than that, then a bigger framework is emancipating. Yeah. But then if that bigger framework begins to constrain your reality, then you need to go beyond that framework too.
Yeah.
And maybe not even find a framework. Maybe there's no one framework that is really going to give you what you're looking for.
Is that the aperspectival of Gebser?
I think it's closer to that. I do, actually. And I don't think that the aperspectival is a framework.
Yeah, right. Right. Can I interject something along? Because I want your opinion about this. And it ties into Mark, because a lot of this is my understanding of postmodern. And one of the things that came along with them is questioning the power dynamics and how much power, even the eroticism has a power, and how we relate to power, either inside of ourselves or, share power. And so, this is one thing that I have, Wilbur has helped me understanding his hierarchy of honoring that warrior power, but with this, enlarging the framework of how do I hold and work with that, and to me that brings on I'll just use this, a keto kind of martial arts ethic in using power, if that makes sense.
Mm. Do you want to reply to that, Mark, or? Because the power thing, I think it relates to what you talked about, elitism, because I do think there's the ideas and then there's sort of how they're expressed and manifested. And, I think that, it's very easy to take a big framework and think that you know it all. I'm not accusing Wilbur of this, because he's changed over the years too. The way he's sort of, something in the tone of his voice is different now than it was 20 years ago. And there's maybe subtle shifts. But, you could use a framework like any other consciousness technology in all kinds of ways. And, the ego can appropriate a framework and use it to arrogate to itself privileges or prestige that maybe it doesn't really deserve, hasn't really earned. And then you could take that and say, well, all these other people who are expressing their identity-based complaints, they're just not as evolved. But are you really empathizing with them? And are you really are you categorizing them into that framework that you have, or are you relating to them as sort of the mystery that they are, like that infinite aspect of them? And that's, to me, where Wilber's, where the third tier and kind of stuff, maybe that's what that's about, where where what's centered is not the lens, not the framework, but sort of the presence that's actually there. And that's actually how you live all the time. Like that, if I had to guess at what that would be, that sort of state structure synthesis, it would be is that you're not just a separate self. You're not just the skin encapsulated ego, that grows up and shows up and wakes up, but you're more than yourself. Like you are that. It becomes hard to talk about. That's why you need poetry, I think, at the next level. It's just interesting that we're talking about this, because then in the other conversation, they're talking about first order culture and second order culture and potentially third order culture. And there's another correspondence that may or may not be kind of more or less the same thing. And maybe it's just a preference sometimes of how you want to talk about it. All right. That's all I have to say for now.
So, question, Marco, how are you responding to the reemergence of Wilbur and his integral theory? Positively, do you think he's past his prime? How do you react to his reemergence? Is it how's that affecting you? You have a closer relationship than any of us.
I'm glad to see it. And I think that he really does have something to offer. And I know enough of it, or I've heard enough of it. Many of the things that he says, he's been saying for 20 years. And so, at a certain point, it's just kind of burned in. And I'm looking for other perspectives. And that's, I think, natural. So I don't feel like I personally need it, as maybe as much as others might. And at the same time, it's like just medicine, what is the right lens for the occasion? I wouldn't give a Wilbur book maybe to some people, but I would give it to somebody else. It's just what's right for somebody. What's going to be the next thing that lets their worldview kind of grow. That's to me as I really appreciate it. I've been in wanting to differentiate from Wilbur, and I think to a large degree, for what it's worth, in whatever narrow domain that I have. And so I would rather be kind of conversant, from through respecting those differentiations, respecting the differences, but being able then to learn from them. I mean, I think that still can happen. It's just not my focus. Because the intellectual dark web is not my focus either. It's not that interesting to me, actually. I'm looking for more beauty, frankly.
What my own interest is in, my own shit, not other people's. And so that's kind of my question. I mean, how ultimately, how is differentiation, individual versus collective, isn't that really a expression of ego, the self wanting to be individuated, differentiated from any sort, any dogma, religion, whatever, that there is a innate drive, and it's ego driven, to become somebody in and of yourself. And that's always been part of the evolutionary process, and it drives forth, quote unquote, progress, is people innate desire to differentiate from that which they were born into.
Is that all there is just differentiating? Is that where it stops, Mark?
I'm not sure. What do you mean stops?
Well, it seems like
that's a process that never stops.
What
In
I
other
know,
words, in other words, I had an innate desire, I'm going to call it innate desire, to differentiate from my father. And my son has a desire to differentiate from me. In other words, it just seems to be this process. And I'm not convinced that it's progressive. It's just a process. And it's part of evolution, in that a complex evolution. In other words, lizard brain, they're not aware of any of that. And a lot of people aren't. But there seems to be this process to differentiate versus the collective, which is both those forces are interacting on an individual at the same time. And that's where I think Wilbur has it right, is it's all these forces are interacting on organisms, and we humans happen to have the capacity now to be, some of us, to be aware of those forces. And instead of making life easier, makes it more difficult.
I'm just trying to point to that. I think that's one side of the process. There's also what I like about Wilbur is there's an inclusion. I've differentiated from my parents, but I didn't leave them behind. I had to negotiate how that changed the dynamic of the social unit. I've had to do the same thing with allowing my children to differentiate from me. But this is about, to me, that the ego is kind of a developmental placeholder to work with how we grow, how we not just wake up, but we grow in our understanding of how to experience this life. And and we have to be careful of that side of the ego that gets trapped into narcissistic bullshit. But there's also, to me, through my practice of meditation and my daily practice of bringing awareness to how does my behavior affect another person, and yet how can I stand my ground? and not just, and be aware of my behavior, and so that I'm going to be my own person. But I've had to learn not to come from a place of, and being my own person, I'm going to hurt you or I'm going to demean you. That's just, I have had to grow up and change that dynamic. So I don't disagree with it. Just, it seems like, it felt like to me when you were describing that it just ends there. And I think there's a parallel process of differentiating, becoming larger, but that doesn't need necessarily you leave behind your social unit that you grow up in. It just changes the dynamic of it.
Well, I don't have an answer, and Wilbur speaks to this very well. He talks about including and transcending.
Right.
But, and I think that's true.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think all human beings, philosophers, I believe, have been at that same point trying to figure out what is true, what is the truth. And it keeps growing with the inflection of science. Oh, well, used to think this, now we think this because we know a little bit more and we know a little bit more. And I'm sort of at the point where I believe it's a finite planet. Some people believe that we're going to solve these problems by, you know, either consciousness expanding or the universe, or we're going to go find other planets or something like that. And I'm sort of, you know, rooted in, it's a finite planet, we're here, and we're part of the biosphere, and we have some problems we need to solve, or, you know, it's gonna get ugly.
Well, it's already ugly in a sense. It's already ugly.
So,
yeah, uglier.
but it's always been that way. One of the things on my thing is the friendly, hostile. I believe the external world is a chaotic, hostile environment.
Oh, okay.
And any organism tries to manage that.
Okay. I don't have.
But that's a
And
belief. But that's
I don't
one belief, and
Yeah.
you could have other beliefs too. Like you could believe that the environment gives you everything you need, and for millions of years, even though every organism was subject to being food, every organism also had food and had enough to survive and reproduce. And so there's a lot to be grateful for, and all of the chaos and the hostility between organisms.
That assumes, though, and this goes back to being born in square one, that assumes that that in the human situation, that those people who brought you into the world are going to take care of you and protect you so that you can develop. But if they, and this is part, if they abandon you, neglect you, abuse you, yeah, that's not a nice place to be. And a lot of the people born into this world, either through the immediate family or the larger society, they're just, yeah, it's a hostile world. It's a hostile world. There's very few people, it's not so.
Okay, but I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, but we also make it a hostile world, and you know we have a certain amount of control. I mean, certainly as parents, I don't have to let my kids watch anything they want on TV or YouTube. Like I could give them the environment for a very long time. Actually, I could allow their brains to develop, to the point where the subconscious programming, which is mostly going to run their life, is relatively sane, relatively healthy. We could build a culture, we could build its institutions, practices, like that's what a good society does or would do. And so I wanted to, before the end of the cafe, I wanted to plug a couple of movies that I saw, which are quite related to this, because you were talking about, escaping the planet and expansion. And then Doug earlier was talking about like teachers for his children, which I really resonate with. Like I don't even send our kids to school because I don't want them to. I want to shape their environment, and then of course they're going to grow beyond that and be able to explore whatever they want. Speaking of which, yes. I'm almost done, and then we're gonna go to the park.
Okay, we're almost done cleaning.
Okay, you better. Yeah, you should finish cleaning.
We left not as much stuff.
Okay. Okay, bye.
That is perfect, Marco. That is perfect.
So the two films, we went on Sunday and we saw. I really highly recommend it. It's a documentary. It's in theaters now. It's called Apollo 11. And what it is, it's all archival footage of the lunar landing. And the way that it was put together, there's no narration. It's just stunning photography and stunning kind of editing to tell the story of this incredible feat. And what was one of the things that was really interesting about it is that this happened, this like act of collective just mobilization of all the, think of what it took, the amount of brain power and commitment and dedication to go to the moon. But that's happening in the context of the Cold War and of this sort of, this enmity or this threat of potential annihilation between large-scale tribes, right? And at the same time that there's massive social unrest in the United States, and yet this kind of symbolic gesture was made all for the sake of creating some sense of national unity, and it arguably it even transcended that, because to strip away the patriotic stuff and you have this story of a species, the humankind evolving through all of its trials and tribulations, through all of the war, all of the everything that we went through, and achieving this kind of transcendence, this amazing feat. I thought that was really inspiring. And one of the commentaries is that, well, we couldn't imagine that happening today, but why not? Like, why don't we have unifying goals, that would not just unite one nation against another, but maybe unite humanity against apocalypse. Like, what would it take? And this is also the other conversation, the generations conversation with Jabbour Loeffler. They asked this question, what would it take to unify humanity into a single kind of tribe? And part of the idea is, well, maybe it takes like some kind of existential threat. And
exactly.
But the other film I want to plug, it's a documentary as well, and you can get it on the internet. It's of Mr. Rogers. It's the biography of Mr. Rogers. It's called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And it's almost around the same time of Apollo 11, when public television, television is becoming a major media force. Like, this is before all the fragmentation that we're experiencing now, when we were starting to see what the dark side might be and how people might start to use this media in order to segment and divide and profit off of us. And this man, who I think was as much a hero as Neil Armstrong in another way, is trying to stand up for just basic human decency of like recognizing the precious beingness of a child and relating to that as an adult, as somebody that wants to be nurture the development of a soul, the development of a good person, like not a fucked up person who, I mean, it's cool. There's a lot of aesthetic potential in fucked upness. So I don't have, I don't have exactly, I don't believe in just the pure goody two shoes kind of world. Like, I think that there's a purpose or there could be, we can give a purpose to, all the tragic aspects of life. Nonetheless, if we don't learn from that to try to make things better, then what's the point? So I think that that's what sort of that's what Mr. Rogers offers, is kind of a different frontier, a different way of transcending and including. And there's so much more to talk about. The thing about living forever, and how do you know you don't live forever? that would be my question. And it gets down to our sense of who we are, our sense of self. And I just appreciate the conversation and the way that we're able to do this. So that's all I'll say.
100%.
Yeah. Thanks to Doug too for organizing and his gentle touch.
Yeah, I'll just briefly end that. Yeah, Mr. Rogers has been a recent hero of mine that I didn't realize was someone with such a passion for just not necessarily doing the right thing, but yeah, he was a good voice. So that I recommend that documentary too. Just a good voice, an advocate for just the simpleness of exploration and all that good stuff.
Well, one of the titles of one of Wilbur's books, "The Simple Feeling of Being."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which is nice. It's a nice title, huh?
Yeah, it is.
And also the biography
book.
by Maxwell King on Fred Rogers is a good read too. It kind of fills in the gaps and adds a good timeline that the documentary didn't necessarily cover. But the documentary covers all the essential points, I think. But yeah, thank you, Mark, for putting this together. All I did was click a few buttons.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
Appreciate
Doug makes it happen, and Marco made it happen, and it's just one of those things. I'll be around tomorrow at least. I go day to day, moment by moment.
Oh, Mark, what music are you listening to today?
I have a couple soundtracks, and I keep adding to it. That's one thing. Somewhere I mentioned, there's just layer upon layer upon layer, and I don't know if it's getting better. I like a lot of the old stuff, singer-songwriter stuff. Is rap really is that I don't
Okay,
let's
let's remember we grew up when they couldn't show Elvis Presley's hips shaking. So let's remember.
Graceland. But yeah, those the song Ed put on there, Joan Armstrong. I love that song. I
did.
And I Shall Be Released, Dylan and the band.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. And the stuff today, that's not where I'm at.
But you would say that.
I would say that. I did say that.
And he did say that.
All right, never one to disappoint. I'll see you guys later. I'm going to the park.
Right.
Nice seeing you, Marco. Nice seeing you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
You guys do good.
How do I get out of here?